At a warehouse entrance, a reversing delivery truck closes the gap beside a heavy sliding metal gate, turning a routine backing move into a tightening blind zone hazard. At a crowded construction site, a worker climbs onto the yellow machine housing to reach equipment above. At the same moment, the excavator bucket swings down into the same operating zone. In a truck yard tire bay, a worker braces a crowbar against a mounted truck tire beside the trailer. Then the tire ruptures under pressure. On a dimly lit roadside, a worker stands on top of a tanker truck when a sudden pressure release pushes vapor outward in an instant. Inside a small fireworks mixing shed built on a hillside, a metal wheelbarrow of loose pyrotechnic powder is being rolled into the open workspace when a single spark flashes through the dust cloud and the mixture ignites in an instant. Inside a small roadside stall, two people were working at a table near the open entrance when a car suddenly leaves the road and bursts through the front of the shop. Inside a metal fabrication workshop, a worker leans over a clamped assembly beneath a powered press head. Then the upper mechanism drops without warning. Inside a narrow industrial yard lined with trucks and site cabins, a suspended load suddenly loses support and descends without warning. In a cramped alleyway, workers carry a long metal object past hanging overhead wires. Then the load shifts upward into the wrong clearance zone, and the street turns into an instant electrical hazard zone. Inside a chemical processing unit, insulated vessels sit under pressure until a vertical pipe suddenly erupts into a roaring flame. Never, ever work on or adjust pressurized flammable gas systems unless the line is fully isolated, depressurized, purged, and verified safe before contact. On a roadside industrial yard, a heavy truck sits still while welding sparks drift toward a fuel tank that was never truly empty. Then trapped vapors flash, and the space becomes an instant fire hazard zone. On the aft mooring deck of a container vessel, a rotating winch pulls steadily until a single trapped rope tail turns stored tension into a sudden, unpredictable release. Never, ever allow mooring operations to continue when a rope tail, eye, or turn is fouled, trapped, or misaligned on a rotating capstan or winch. Stop the operation immediately and remove the hazard before tension increases. Inside a metal workshop, a worker tries to reposition a long, heavy industrial component lying on the floor. As it shifts upright, the massive piece suddenly tips sideways and crashes back across the shop floor. Never try to manually reposition a long, heavy industrial part unless it is properly supported, stabilized, and controlled with the right handling equipment. Large components can shift their balance without warning once they begin rotating out of a flat resting position. On a gravel roadside beside a utility pole, a man stands near a ladder as a motorcycle approaches fast. Then the scene explodes into dust, debris, and chaos. Roadways are not neutral environments. They are kinetic corridors. Without cones, barriers, or lane control, you are relying on strangers' reaction time. Traffic must be engineered around you, not hoped away. On a sunlit roadside, a worker sits on the edge of a moving flatbed truck. Then one shift in balance changes everything. Motion disguises instability. Perched on an edge, your body becomes cargo without containment. If you are not restrained, you are unsecured freight. At a dockyard, a crane begins lifting a full-size boat with wide lifting straps placed beneath the hull. As the vessel rises, one rigging point slips loose, and the suspended load suddenly shifts in midair. Avoid lifting a boat or any suspended load until every sling, lifting point, and balance angle has been fully checked and secured. A suspended vessel must remain evenly supported from the first inch of lift to prevent sudden load transfer or uncontrolled movement. A suspended load stays stable only when lifting forces are shared correctly across all rigging points. If one strap slips or loses tension, the center of gravity shifts immediately, forcing the remaining support points to carry uneven load and causing the suspended vessel to swing or drop unexpectedly. Suspended loads rely completely on rigging integrity and balance. Verify strap placement, confirm equal support, and never rush the lift. On a scrapyard trailer, a worker carries a metal frame from the center, forgetting it is already wrapped around his body, then tries to throw it toward the pile. Do not carry or throw large open metal frames without first checking how the material is positioned around your body. Always reset your grip, confirm full clearance, and control the frame before moving it. A large open frame can stay looped around the handler when carried from the middle because the shape extends around the body without feeling fully obstructed. The moment a throwing motion begins, that hidden positioning turns the frame into a rotating structure, pulling its path around the worker instead of cleanly away. Before throwing irregular scrap, stop and check exactly how the frame is sitting around you. Control the shape first, then move it only when the path is fully clear. On top of a scrap-loaded truck stacked with loose metal and debris, a worker winds up to throw material over the side. Then unstable footing shifts weight toward the edge. Do not throw materials from elevated truck beds without stable footing and controlled positioning. Secure loose debris, maintain 3 points of contact, and establish a clearly defined drop zone before lifting or swinging. Throwing creates forward momentum, shifting the body's center of gravity beyond the feet and toward the truck's edge. On unstable scrap surfaces, reduced friction and rolling debris eliminate traction, making recovery unlikely once momentum carries outward. Momentum plus unstable footing equals sudden loss of control. Stabilize the platform before lifting, swinging, or throwing materials. At a construction site, a worker steps onto a narrow plank used as a temporary walkway laid across uneven ground. When the board suddenly snaps and the unsupported span collapses, temporary walkways must be properly rated, secured, and supported before anyone steps onto them. In a front yard, several people pull on a rope tied high to a tall tree to bring it down. The trunk suddenly tips, but the fall line shifts, and the tree begins dropping along the pull direction instead of away. Tree removal must control the fall direction and keep everyone outside the drop zone. A tree rotates around its base once gravity overcomes the remaining support. If the pulling force and the tree's center of mass align toward the crew, the trunk will fall along that same path. Falling trees follow gravity, not intention. Plan the direction and clear the fall zone before pulling. On a roadside, a small excavator begins driving onto the rear of a flatbed truck. When the shifting weight lifts one side of the trailer and the load balance suddenly tips sideways. Loading heavy equipment requires stable ramps, proper weight distribution, and a secured transport vehicle. Standing on a ladder, a worker uses a chainsaw to cut into a tall tree trunk. As the cut deepens, the trunk suddenly shifts, pushing the ladder support point out of alignment. Do not cut a tree while positioned on a ladder against the trunk. Tree felling requires a stable work position, a planned escape route, and full control over the intended direction of movement before the cut is completed. As the cut removes supporting wood fibers, the tree's center of mass begins shifting toward the side with less resistance. Any sudden trunk movement transfers force into the ladder, turning the support point unstable almost instantly. A tree can change direction the moment its support is weakened. Stay off the trunk, stay off the ladder, and control the fall path from a stable position. Inside a partially built structure, one worker stands beside adjustable support props while one works from a ladder. Without warning, a loose wooden board above them slips free from its position. Materials stored or handled overhead should always be secured, and workers should avoid standing directly beneath elevated objects. Objects positioned above ground level store gravitational potential energy. When they become unstable or lose support, gravity accelerates them downward, creating a sudden falling object hazard. Loose materials above a work zone can fall instantly. Always secure overhead items and keep clear below. In a residential driveway, a worker stands on top of a van, handling a large flat panel. Suddenly, a gust of wind catches the sheet and lifts it like a sail. Large, lightweight panels should be secured and handled carefully when working at height, especially in windy conditions. Inside a warehouse loading bay, several workers stand talking beside a stacker machine, lifting a tall pile of plastic pallets. Suddenly, the towering stack shifts balance and begins to tip sideways. Workers should stay clear of elevated or stacked loads while lifting equipment is operating. Tall stacked loads raise the center of gravity of the lift system. When the load becomes unbalanced or shifts forward, gravity creates a tipping moment that can cause the stack to fall. Suddenly, stacked loads can become unstable without warning. Always keep distance from raised materials and lifting equipment. In a quiet driveway, a delivery worker stands at the back of a van unloading items. Suddenly, a gust of wind catches the open rear door and swings it wide. Vehicle doors should be secured or held firmly when working in windy conditions. Outside a house, a worker stands on a ladder working on an open electrical panel while another worker stands behind him. In an instant, the exposed conductors arc and flash from the panel. Electrical systems should always be de-energized and properly tested before working on exposed service conductors. Live electrical conductors carry high voltage and current. When a tool, conductor, or contact point bridges energized components, it can create an arc flash, an intense electrical discharge that releases heat and energy instantly. Live electrical panels can release energy without warning. Always isolate power before working on electrical systems. At a muddy construction site, a crane attempts to lift a heavy tractor with its long boom extended. As the load rises, the crane suddenly loses balance. Never attempt a heavy lift unless the crane is on stable ground, properly set up, and operating well within its rated limits. Load weight, boom length, ground condition, and lift radius must all be confirmed before the hoist begins. In a yard, a flatbed truck carrying heavy machinery begins moving, while the unsecured load begins sliding sideways across the truck bed. Vehicle movement and unsecured loads must never happen at the same time during transport operations. Heavy cargo must be secured before motion begins because even a short vehicle movement can turn stored mass into uncontrolled movement. When the truck accelerates, brakes, or changes direction, inertia causes the cargo to keep moving relative to the trailer. If restraints are missing or inadequate, friction alone cannot resist that force, and the load begins sliding in the direction of least resistance. Heavy cargo keeps moving when the truck moves. Secure the load before any vehicle motion. On Freeport Boulevard, a crane lifts the large Rayleigh's storefront sign as crews prepare to remove it for refurbishment. Suddenly, the sign detaches from the rigging and the suspended load drops free. Large suspended structures must be properly rigged and secured before lifting operations begin. Standing on a ladder beside a large tree, a worker uses a long pole to push a broken branch loose. The moment the branch releases, the heavy section swings down along the tension arc beside the trunk. Do control damaged branches from a safe location outside the expected swing path and drop zone before applying force. Branches under tension can release suddenly and move through the space beside and below the breakpoint. A partially broken branch stores energy through bending, tension, and its remaining attachment to the trunk. Once released, gravity and that stored tension combine to drive the branch along a fast swinging arc toward the area below and beside the pivot point. Damaged branches do not fall gently once support gives way. Stay outside the swing path and control the release from a safe distance. On a ship's deck, a worker strikes a heavy chain with a hammer to force it loose. The moment the tension releases, the chain snaps back under load. Workers should stay clear of tension chains or rigging and release the load carefully using proper tools. At a highway construction site, a crane lifts a massive bridge segment into position. Suddenly, the heavy slab loses support and drops from rigging. Workers should stay clear of suspended loads and maintain exclusion zones during heavy lifting operations. Large concrete sections carry enormous weight and rely entirely on lifting points and rigging for stability. If the load shifts or the support fails, gravity immediately pulls the mass downward, releasing massive kinetic energy. Suspended structures can fall without warning. Always keep clear of heavy lifts and respect exclusion zones. Under a lifted vehicle in a garage, a mechanic works beneath the drivetrain while loosening a heavy component. Suddenly, this large gearbox drops downward from the mounting point. Heavy vehicle components should always be supported with proper lifting equipment before removing bolts or mounts. Inside a car wash bay, a worker scrubs a police SUV while standing beside the moving wheel track. In one sudden step, the worker's footing slips into the narrow space beside the guide rail. Keep feet, footwear, and body position clear of vehicle guide rails and wheel tracks whenever a vehicle is being positioned or pulled through an automated wash system. Workers should stay on stable walking surfaces and maintain enough clearance so a small slip, step, or shift does not place them into a pinch point beside the moving tire path. Car wash conveyor tracks guide tires through a narrow and controlled path, but that same path creates tight floor-level pinch zones along the rails. When a vehicle's weight is concentrated through the tires and directed along the guide system, anything entering that space can be pinned quickly by the combined force of motion, alignment, and tire pressure. Guide rails can look harmless until a vehicle begins moving through them. Good footing, careful positioning, and clear distance from the tire path are essential for staying safe inside a wash bay. On a factory floor, a worker leans close over a circular conveyor machine while inspecting the moving line. In a split second, loose hair drifts toward the rotating mechanism. Keep hair, clothing, and loose items secured and away from moving machinery. Inside an industrial workshop, a massive 220-inch ring sizer stretches a large aluminum ring used for aircraft engine housing components. As the hydraulic piston drives down, the machine builds enormous force inside the ring structure. Inspect components for structural defects and maintain safe distance from high-force forming machines during pressurization. Inside a busy warehouse lane, a worker walks along the pallet conveyor area while a forklift approaches carrying a tall stack of crates. The load blocks the driver's forward view as the vehicle moves into the same path. Maintain clear pedestrian zones and ensure forklift operators have unobstructed visibility when transporting loads. On a busy street delivery, a worker stands on the flatbed of a truck, adjusting several large vertical glass panels. In a sudden moment, one tall sheet shifts past its balance point and begins tipping. Secure large sheet materials with proper restraints, stable support frames, and controlled handling methods whenever panels are stored or adjusted in a vertical position. Workers should position themselves away from the panel's tipping arc and avoid standing where a small shift in angle could place them directly in the fall path. Large glass sheets have a tall center of gravity and very limited tolerance for uncontrolled movement once they begin leaning beyond their support angle. If the restraint system loosens or the base support shifts, gravity creates a strong tipping moment that accelerates the panel downward with increasing momentum across the full height of the sheet. Vertical sheet materials can look stable right up until their balance changes. Proper restraints, careful positioning, and staying out of the tipping zone are essential whenever large panels are being handled. At a scrapyard work area, a worker swings a hammer downward to strike a metal piece near the edge of a container. In a split second, the hammer's path slips and redirects along a new swing path. Do maintain controlled striking distance and keep all parts of the body outside the full swing path when using impact tools. The workpiece should be positioned securely, and the worker's stance should allow the tool to miss the body completely even if the strike glances off, slips, or rebounds from the target surface. A hammer builds kinetic energy through speed and mass during the swing. If the striking face hits at the wrong angle, slips off the edge, or rebounds from a hard surface, that energy does not disappear. It redirects instantly along a new path, determined by the contact angle and momentum of the tool. Impact tools can change direction in a fraction of a second when the strike is not perfectly controlled. Safe body position, proper target setup, and disciplined swing clearance are what keep that energy away from the operator. In a backyard clearing, two people pull a rope tied high to a tall tree, trying to bring it down. The tree suddenly snaps free, but instead of falling away, the fall line shifts and the tree drops along the pull direction. Tree felling requires controlled cutting direction and a clear escape zone to keep the fall path away from workers. When a tree is pulled without proper directional cuts, its center of mass determines the fall. If the pull line aligns with the workers, gravity guides the trunk directly toward that line. Trees follow physics, not intentions. Control the fall direction and keep the drop zone clear. Inside a small workshop, a machinist stands beside a running metal lathe while talking on his phone. In a moment of distraction, he steps closer to the spinning shaft. Workers should remain fully focused and keep hands clear of rotating machinery while equipment is operating. Inside a storage room stacked floor with blue battery units, a worker leans over a charging cluster. Then a sudden flash spreads energy across the row. Never, ever charge or handle high-energy batteries in an unventilated, cluttered space without thermal monitoring and separation. Always isolate charging zones and control ignition sources. On a backyard deck, a man transitions from an extension ladder toward the roof edge when the unsecured ladder suddenly loses footing. Movement between surfaces is where stability resets. During transfer, neither platform fully supports you. Secure the ladder before shifting commitment from rung to roof. Inside a fabrication shop, a forklift moves forward beneath a suspended load, then contact shifts the overhead system out of balance. When horizontal travel intersects vertical lifting, risk compounds. Mobile equipment and suspended weight obey different physics. Keep those systems isolated, or their failure modes combine. On a quiet roadside, an overloaded flatbed stacked high with bricks suddenly rolls forward despite appearing stationary. Parking brakes are resistance, not restraint. Before going underneath, convert friction into physical immobilization with chocks and stands that cannot negotiate with gravity. Inside a metal workshop, a heavy machine hangs from a crane hook, then a sudden pressure releases from beneath it in a cloud of dust. Treat every sealed or unknown container as energized until proven otherwise. Identify and neutralize hidden pressure before lifting overhead. At a facility entrance, a woman reaches to close a massive sliding steel gate when the gate shifts off its guide track and begins to fall. Large gates rarely collapse without warning. They drift, grind, misalign. When guide systems degrade, gravity waits for the final inch. Structural weight demands mechanical redundancy, not trust in rails. A man sits inside a small office beside an idling truck. Then a sudden flash ignites, and a pressure wave moves rapidly across the room. Vapor hazards build quietly. Distance engines from enclosed spaces, because ignition rarely announces itself before expansion does. Fuel vapors can accumulate in confined areas and mix with air within the explosive range. When an ignition source is introduced, combustion causes rapid gas expansion, generating a brief overpressure wave that expands outward from the ignition point. Combustion spreads faster than reaction time. Control vapors isolate engines and protect occupied spaces. A loaded dumper raises its bed with a worker standing on it. Then the machine shifts off balance and begins to tip. When machinery rises, hierarchy matters. Supervisors control timing. Operators follow signals. Allowing personnel to remain aboard during elevation signals a breakdown in command structure, not a momentary lapse. At a busy loading dock, a man steps into the narrow gap between a raised ramp and a delivery vehicle to check alignment. Then the vehicle begins reversing toward the dock. Loading docks narrow perspective. Workers focus on alignment, not on motion. In tight infrastructure, inches disappear faster than awareness expands. Stop movement before solving position. When a vehicle reverses, even slow rolling motion eliminates clearance in tight dock gaps almost instantly. With rigid steel and concrete on both sides, the space becomes a fixed pinch point where compressive force builds the moment contact occurs. Dock gaps are engineered for loading, not standing. Stop the wheels before you step between. An inexperienced forklift operator lifts a heavy crate high above a truck bed as workers remain nearby. Then the elevated load begins to shift. Most catastrophic lift failures begin with normalization, just a little higher. Just this once. Elevation beyond task requirement converts routine handling into prosecutable negligence. Lift only as high as the job demands. In a busy auto workshop, a truck sits elevated high on a hydraulic lift while a mechanic works directly beneath the chassis. Then the vehicle lowers, unexpectedly from the lift. Working beneath a vehicle before confirming physical lock engagement is a sequencing error. The task feels complete, but the safeguard is still pending. Completion without verification creates false security, and in mechanical environments, assumption is often the final step before catastrophic failure. Hydraulic systems rely on pressure and proper arm positioning to keep the vehicle's center of gravity within the lift's support frame. If that center shifts beyond the base due to misplacement, imbalance, or pressure loss, gravity overcomes support instantly and the vehicle descends. Elevation stores energy you cannot see. Confirm the locks, confirm the balance, then step underneath. A man stands high on a partially cut tree trunk with a chainsaw, carving through the final fibers. Then the trunk suddenly snaps upright and whips free with explosive force, launching him into air as splintered wood scatters in every direction. Never, Ever cut a load-bearing trunk while standing on the unsupported section, establish a stable ground position, secure a clearly mapped escape path, and control the fall direction before completing the final cut under tension. As the cut deepens, the tree's internal compression and tension fibers store elastic energy like a loaded spring under mounting strain. When those fibers release unevenly, that stored energy converts into rapid rotational motion, pivoting violently around the hinge and rebounding unpredictably beyond the intended fall line. Wood under tension stores power you cannot see. Control the hinge, or the hinge controls you. A log-loaded three-wheeler reverses onto a raised weighbridge without proper alignment. Then, the wheels move beyond the platform's edge and lose support. Narrow platforms erase recovery space. Once the tire crosses the edge, steering cannot restore support. Alignment must be confirmed before momentum commits. In a stone yard lined with towering concrete slabs, a worker reaches for the truck door as a suspended block begins lowering into the truck space behind. Crane operations create divided authority. Operator above, ground crew below. When roles overlap without verbal clearance, blind zones multiply. No one approaches until one voice controls the entire sequence. Inside a tire workshop, a mounted heavy-duty wheel spins on the machine. Then a sudden pressure release sends metal fragments outward in an instant. A pressurized tire is a steel-banded pressure vessel, inflate from a protected position inside a restraint cage that absorbs failure if the rim separates. At the edge of a deep excavation site, a cutting torch bites into a buried metal structure. Then pressure releases from below. Positively identify, isolate, and gas test any buried structure before applying heat. Unknown underground spaces carry stored energy. Confined underground structures can trap flammable vapors under pressure. When heat or sparks are introduced, ignition can trigger rapid combustion and pressure expansion, pushing soil and debris outward. Hidden spaces can hold invisible energy. Identify, test, and vent before you cut, because underground pressure does not forgive guesswork. Balanced on the ladder, she reaches down to grab the paint. Then her footing shifts and the ladder loses stability. Reaching sideways converts vertical support into lateral torque. The ladder remains upright, but your balance migrates beyond its footprint. Reposition first, reach second. Stability depends on alignment, not convenience or speed. 4 workers position themselves beneath a raised dump bed loaded with rubble when the elevated frame begins to move unexpectedly. Hydraulics create temporary elevation, but gravity remains permanent. When support depends on pressure alone, time becomes the hidden trigger. Mechanical pins convert borrowed lift into secured structure. The telehandler lifts on loose gravel, the cab door wide open, while the operator leans out as the machine begins to tilt past its balance point. Never, ever operate a telehandler while leaning outside the cab or with the door unsecured. Remain seated, restrained, and fully inside the protective frame at all times. When the boom rises, the center of gravity already shifts upward and forward. Adding side body weight outside the cab moves it laterally toward the tipping line. On sloped, unconsolidated ground, even a small side shift can push the combined center of mass beyond the stability triangle, allowing gravity to rotate the machine. Your position changes the machine's balance. Stay inside the frame. Let physics stay on your side. A suspended metal frame hangs in the workshop bay. Just as a worker steps forward and reaches for it, his footing gives way beneath him. Reaching for a moving load is instinct. Control is discipline. Stabilize your footing first, then command the load with tools, not your hands. At a busy transit platform, several workers move a large, upright glass panel when it suddenly tilts off balance and swings sideways toward the walkway. Use mechanical handling frames and suction supports when transporting oversized glass. Manual balance is not enough. Large glass sheets have a high center of gravity and minimal tolerance for angular shift. Once the load passes its balance point, gravity creates rotational torque that rapidly accelerates the panel sideways beyond human control. Size multiplies instability. Control the load with the right equipment, because once glass tips, momentum takes over. A large suspended bulk bag swings over a packing table, then the holding ropes snap unexpectedly and it drops. The moment a discharge spout is opened, load stability changes. Stand clear of the release path, because flow shifts balance before your brain registers movement. On a sloped rooftop, one worker braces a loose wooden beam in place, while another swings a hammer to keep it in place, unknown that he is in a position that he shouldn't be. Never, ever position your head, hands, or body between unsecured framing members while impact tools are in use. Stabilize materials and stay clear first. Each hammer strike transfers kinetic energy into the timber, sending vibration and shock waves through the beam. Those forces can cause sudden micro shifts or rebound movement, instantly turning tight gaps into high-force compression points. Impact tools create movement you can't fully predict. Secure the structure and clear the pinch zone before hammering. At a container yard loading zone, a suspended shipping container shifts off balance above a waiting truck, and in seconds, gravity takes over. Container loading fails in phases, not seconds. The most dangerous moment is mid-transfer, when weight is suspended but not yet committed. Treat that interval as an exclusion zone, not a viewing area. Inside a locomotive maintenance workshop, a worker squats between two rail cars to begin shunting. Completely unaware, another rail car begins moving from behind without a coordinated signal. Rail yards operate on layered permission, signals, confirmation, redundancy. When even one layer is assumed instead of verified, parallel movement becomes invisible threat. Enter only after procedural silence is confirmed. Rail cars carry enormous mass, and even low-speed movement produces powerful momentum. In confined coupling gaps, that momentum converts the space into a rapid compression zone with almost no reaction time. Heavy rail never stops on assumption. Verify, communicate, and control movement before stepping in. At night, on a roadside shoulder, a man sits on the open tailgate of a parked pickup. When approaching headlights, draw closer along the same lane. If traffic is active, create distance and buffer space. Roadside positioning should never rely on driver attention alone. On a steep grassy hillside, an off-road vehicle edges too close to the slope's crest. Then the vehicle's balance shifts and gravity begins to pull it down on a slope. Slopes do not fail gradually, they fail at thresholds. Know your machine's rollover. Angle before the hill's side discovers it for you. A crane swings a massive boulder across the site. Boom extended and load suspended high. Then the suspended load swings rapidly to the opposite side as tension shifts across the boom. Never, ever operate a crane with unstable ground support, excessive swing speed, or loads that exceed the rated capacity for the current radius. As the load swings, its momentum shifts laterally, multiplying dynamic side loading on the boom, slewing ring, and outriggers. If the ground-bearing pressure, structural components, or stabilizers cannot counter that sudden torque spike, the imbalance can escalate quickly into loss of structural stability or tip over. Momentum can overpower stability faster than operators expect. Slow the swing, confirm ground support, and respect dynamic load limits every time. In a tight loading yard between stacked pallets and parked trucks, a worker climbs down the mast of a forklift, and the narrow steel frame suddenly becomes a pinch point. A forklift mast is not a ladder. Use approved access equipment and keep clear of moving carriage rails and pinch zones. At a covered car wash bay, a worker stands directly in front of a white SUV, guiding it onto the wash platform. Then the vehicle suddenly surges forward. Guiding a vehicle means staying out of its direct path. Position yourself offset and maintain an escape route at all times. Beside a warehouse wall, a telescopic boom lift stretches outward. Then the bucket jolts and the elevated position turns unstable in an instant. Never, ever stand unsecured in a boom lift bucket without proper fall protection and stable positioning. Sudden machine movement can quickly shift the platform and reduce stability. On a narrow storefront sidewalk, workers guide a tall pallet off a truck. Then the stacked load suddenly tips sideways. Control tall loads from the safe side, never the fall side. Gravity always wins once balance shifts. On a partially supported concrete slab high above the ground, a worker cuts into the surface. Then the platform beneath him suddenly gives way. Before cutting into any structural surface, confirm how the load is supported. Removing material changes the entire force distribution. On a narrow roadside, too, workers carry a full-size glass panel across the edge of traffic when a motorcycle approaches along the same path without clear visibility. Separate oversized, fragile loads from live traffic with barriers and spotters. Visibility and control must be deliberate, not assumed. Inside a vehicle workshop, a black sedan hangs high on a two-post hydraulic lift until the balance suddenly shifts. Before stepping beneath a raised vehicle, confirm arm placement, balance, and mechanical lock engagement. Support systems must be verified, not trusted blindly. In a cluttered scrapyard, a welding arc touches a sealed metal container. Then trapped vapor ignites in a sudden flash. Purge, ventilate, and test containers before striking an arc. Residual vapors can convert heat into explosive force. Residual fuel vapors inside a sealed container can mix with oxygen to form a flammable atmosphere. A welding arc introduces extreme heat and sparks, instantly igniting the vapor and causing rapid pressure expansion that can split the metal shell. Empty doesn't mean safe. Purge, test, and ventilate before striking an arc, because trapped vapor turns heat into force in seconds. On a snow-covered rooftop, a worker pushes a shovel across the red metal surface, then his footing disappears without warning. Anchor first, move second. Roof work in winter requires fall restraint and controlled footing before any clearing begins. Snow and ice drastically reduce surface friction, especially on sloped metal roofing. Once traction is lost, gravity accelerates the body downslope, and without guardrails or harness systems, there is nothing to counter that momentum. Winter reduces traction fast. Anchor yourself before you clear, because gravity never takes a snow day. On a busy roadside work zone, a worker stands on the bed of a parked truck when a moving truck suddenly strikes it. Never, ever perform work on or around a parked vehicle in live traffic without proper barricades, traffic control, and impact protection in place. A moving truck carries significant kinetic energy proportional to its mass and speed. When it strikes a stationary vehicle, that energy transfers instantly through the structure, creating sudden forward motion and secondary impact forces. Parked doesn't mean protected. Control traffic, create buffer zones, and shield the work area because moving mass always wins against still metal. High above a narrow courtyard, a chainsaw bites into a leaning tree trunk. Then the trunk suddenly swings back under released tension. Read the lean, assess stored tension, and plan your escape path before making the first cut. A leaning tree stores potential energy through gravity and internal wood fiber tension. When cut improperly, the release of compression and tension forces can redirect the trunk unpredictably, causing rapid rotational movement and structural rebound. Trees don't just fall, they react. Read the lean, control the cut, and secure your position before releasing stored energy. On a narrow excavation beside a building wall, workers stand along the trench edge as the saturated soil suddenly begins to move. Excavations require protective systems, shore, slope, or shield before anyone enters below grade. When soil becomes saturated, water reduces internal friction and weakens cohesion between particles. The trench wall loses shear strength, and gravity causes the mass to collapse inward without warning. Soil can look solid until it isn't. Shore it, slope it, or stay out of it. As a truck passes, its tire rolls over a loose object on the road, sending it ricocheting toward a worker, releasing a flatbed tailgate. Keep clear of passing traffic energy. Small road debris can become high-speed projectiles without warning. When a tire compresses a loose object, stored elastic energy and rotational force can launch it unpredictably at high speed. That sudden kinetic transfer turns a small object into a fast-moving projectile within milliseconds. Roadside energy is unpredictable and violent. Control the area, wear protection, and never underestimate ricochet hazards. In a flooded rice field, a tractor strains against deep mud. Then its front end rises sharply as engine torque shifts the balance. Adjust pull angle and throttle gradually. Torque shifts can rotate machinery faster than reaction time allows. When rear wheels gain traction while the front remains resisted, torque pivots the tractor around its rear axle. This rotational force can rapidly shift the center of gravity backward, leading to a rearward rotation within seconds. Power without control becomes leverage against you. Reduce throttle, adjust the pull, and respect torque, because machines rotate faster than most expect. On a riverbank weakened by fast-moving water, several people stand near the edge. When the saturated ground suddenly fractures and drops away, maintain setback distance from eroded edges. Soil near water may be unsupported beneath the surface. Flowing water erodes the base of riverbanks, removing support from underneath the soil mass. Once the overhanging section exceeds its structural strength, gravity causes a sudden shear failure and collapse. Edges near water are often hollow underneath. Step back from unstable ground, because erosion works silently until the moment it gives way. On the back of a flatbed trailer, a worker straddles a loose wooden plank when the board suddenly pivots upward without warning. Secure loose materials before stepping on them. Unstable boards turn into levers under uneven load. When weight is applied unevenly to a loose board resting over gaps, the plank can pivot like a lever. Sudden force shifts create upward rotational energy, causing the opposite end to rise rapidly and unexpectedly. Loose materials turn into levers under pressure. Secure the surface before stepping on it, because instability reacts faster than balance. With the hood open on a parked vehicle, a man sprays liquid into the engine bay. Then ignition flashes outward from the front grille. Eliminate ignition sources and allow full cooling before introducing flammable substances into confined engine spaces. Engine bays contain residual heat, electrical arcs, and exposed ignition components. When aerosolized flammable vapors contact a hot surface or spark, combustion can ignite instantly, producing a fast-moving flash of flame. Engines hold heat long after they stop running. Keep flammables away from ignition sources because vapor plus spark creates immediate ignition. In a warehouse lined with stacked beverage crates, a worker slides a pallet jack under a tall load. Then the stack suddenly leans and crashes down. Never, ever lift stacked crates with a pallet jack unless the load is evenly distributed, tightly secured, and fully supported on a stable pallet. If the forks are not fully engaged or the load is top-heavy, the center of gravity can shift outside the base of support during lifting. Once that tipping threshold is crossed, gravity generates rotational force that pulls the stack into collapse. Lifting without balance invites gravity to take over. Center the load, secure the stack, and lift smoothly, because unstable cargo falls fast. On a busy sidewalk, a worker walks alongside a flatbed loaded with concrete blocks when a heavy slab suddenly slides off the truck's edge. Enforce exclusion zones around loaded trucks and secure cargo with rigid restraints before transit. When heavy materials are stacked without rigid side restraints, road vibration or minor lateral shifts can move the load past its support edge. Once the center of gravity crosses that boundary, gravity converts height into downward force with no recovery time. The danger zone extends beyond the truck bed. Secure the load and control the perimeter because falling mass follows gravity, not intention. Inside a noisy industrial shop, a worker steps up to a hydraulic press for a quick adjustment. And the hazard zone is closer than it looks. Never, ever reach into a machine's moving zone unless it's fully shut down, locked out, and proven safe. On a narrow street of shuttered shops, a man washes his truck when it suddenly begins creeping forward and he moves toward the front to intervene. Never, ever try to physically stop a moving vehicle with your hands. Step clear and avoid the path of travel immediately. A rolling vehicle carries mass and accelerating momentum that rapidly exceed human pushing force. Once motion begins, inertia continues forward until braking force or an external barrier interrupts it. Momentum follows physics, not intention. Secure the vehicle before stepping away, because hands cannot stop what gravity has already set in motion. Inside a small utility room cluttered with shelves and charging equipment, an e-bike battery sits plugged in when it suddenly ignites in a rapid burst of flame. Charge lithium batteries in controlled environments, away from combustibles, and under supervision. Lithium-ion battery failure can trigger thermal runaway, where internal cell damage causes rapid heat escalation and chain reactions between cells. The released energy ignites flammable gases, producing rapidly spreading flames within seconds. Lithium batteries demand respect. Charge smart, charge supervised, and keep ignition sources contained. In a partially demolished structure, two workers push against a standing wall section when the slab suddenly shifts off balance and collapses inward. stabilize, or mechanically dismantle weakened structures. Never rely on pushing force to control structural failure. A weakened wall stores unstable gravitational load once its support system is compromised. When force shifts its center of mass past the base support line, gravity accelerates the structure downward in the direction of imbalance. Structures fall where balance fails. Plan the collapse and stay outside the fall zone. In a busy loading dock, a forklift carrying a double-stacked load approaches a narrow bay opening. Then the top section strikes the frame and shift loose. Never, ever enter a restricted height or narrow access point with a stacked load unless clearance is verified and the load is properly secured and within rated limits. When an elevated load contacts a fixed overhead obstruction, the sudden horizontal deceleration transfers force through the stack. With the center of mass already elevated, even a minor impact force can overcome friction and restraint, causing the upper section to separate. Clearance is not a guess. Measure the path before moving the load. Inside a workshop, a worker stands in front of an exposed electrical panel and reaches inside with both hands when a sudden flash erupts from the box. De-energize, lock out, test for absence of voltage, and wear rated PPE before working inside electrical panels. When conductive tools or hands bridge energized terminals, the electrical potential difference drives instantaneous current flow. That rapid discharge can create an arc flash, releasing extreme thermal energy and rapid pressure expansion in milliseconds. Electricity is invisible, but unforgiving. De-energize first or don't touch it. Inside a steel frame construction zone, a worker climbs onto a narrow scaffold platform, seconds before balance and gravity take control. Use secured access points, guardrails, and fall protection when working at elevation. Platform stability must be confirmed before climbing. When a person's center of gravity shifts beyond the scaffold's base of support, stability is instantly lost. Without guardrails or tie-off, gravity accelerates the body downward at 9.8 meters per second squared, leaving no time for recovery. Height multiplies risk in seconds. Secure the platform, tie off properly, and respect gravity every time. An overloaded pickup begins reversing down a loose, rocky slope. Its bed stacked high and uneven, then gravity shifts the balance, and the vehicle moves laterally offline. Drivers trust steering more than physics. On a loose slope, gravity steers first. Secure the load and control descent before the terrain chooses your direction. When reversing downhill, weight transfers forward and down slope, while gravity accelerates the vehicle's total mass. On loose rock, tire contact patches lose friction. If the elevated load shifts laterally, rotational torque increases quickly, driving the center of gravity past the rollover threshold faster than steering inputs can respond. Gravity doesn't negotiate, especially in reverse. Control your load, control your speed, and respect the slope before committing. After checking the first tank, the worker turns and walks toward the second vessel, unaware that faint smoke is beginning to rise from the first tank behind him, seconds before internal pressure releases outward. Instruments confirm reality, eyes confirm appearance. Before leaving a pressure vessel, verify readings, not impressions. Smoke or vapor discharge can indicate rising internal temperature, pressure, buildup, or an active combustion reaction within a confined tank. When flammable gases accumulate inside a sealed structure and find an ignition source, rapid combustion increases internal pressure sharply, causing the vessel to fail and release energy outward. A visual check is not proof of control. Test, monitor, and isolate before you walk away. A short ladder rests on top of a scaffold beneath an open second-floor window as a woman works to adjust the frame. Then the elevated system begins to shift as balance changes unexpectedly. Bulk materials behave like liquid once released. As contents flow, the center of mass migrates unpredictably. Expect structural shift the instant containment changes. Stacking a ladder on a scaffold dramatically raises the combined center of gravity while reducing the effective stability footprint. When body weight shifts outward during reaching, drilling, or tool handling, lateral force creates rotational torque that can exceed the scaffold's base width, triggering progressive instability and full system collapse. Height increases leverage, and leverage magnifies instability. Stability is built from the ground up. Secure every layer before you climb. Inside a cramped tire workshop, a mechanic leans in close to a massive wheel on the changer until stored pressure turns routine work into an instant hazard. Never, ever stand in the danger zone of a pressurized tire. Always inflate from a safe distance using a restraint system or remote airline. A tire is a pressure container storing compressed energy in the rubber, bead, and rim. If the bead slips or the structure fails, that energy releases instantly, turning the wheel assembly into a fast-moving hazard. A tire doesn't need speed to be dangerous. Pressure alone is enough. If you're too close when it fails, the release happens faster than reaction time. Inside a loading bay marked 02, a worker climbs a tall extension ladder resting against a wall above a vending machine, when the ladder suddenly slides and drops away. Tie off extension ladders at top and bottom and set the correct angle. Friction alone is not a safety system. Extension ladders rely on friction at the base and stable support at the top. On polished concrete, insufficient friction allows the base to slip outward, shifting the ladder's angle beyond its stability range and causing rapid loss of support. Height amplifies small mistakes. Secure the ladder before you climb, because once it moves, stability disappears instantly. In a quarry yard at night, a reversing dump truck turns a quiet tailgate into a fast-developing hazard zone with no warning. Never, ever position yourself beneath, behind, or inside the movement zone of a truck tailgate or body when vehicle motion is possible or not positively isolated. Inside a vehicle workshop, a tire quietly fills with air until stored pressure pushes the assembly past its safe limit without warning. Never, ever inflate a tire without proper restraint, distance, and controlled pressure monitoring, especially when the wheel assembly is unsecured or damaged. High above an oil-filled work platform, suspended iron and steel hang silently until gravity and momentum turn a routine operation into a sudden vertical hazard. Never, ever position personnel or equipment beneath suspended loads, open gratings, or active vertical work zones without positive isolation, secondary retention, and clear drop zone control. In a residential yard, a skid steer grips a partially cut tree until gravity, hinge wood, and machine force combine into an uncontrolled fall path. Never, ever stand within the fall zone, hinge line, or rebound path of a tree being cut, pushed, or pulled by machinery unless the tree's direction and energy release are fully controlled. In a commercial kitchen, a heavy stockpot is carried across the line until it shifts and gravity turns contained heat into a fast-spreading floor hazard. Never, ever carry containers of hot liquid with unsecured lids or unstable covers. Liquids must be fully restrained or transported in a way that prevents sudden release. Inside a motorcycle workshop, a routine bend-down movement turns a hidden upright tool into an unseen vertical hazard. Never, ever leave sharp tools standing upright or positioned behind work areas where visibility is limited and normal body movements can place someone directly into the hazard. While closing a heavy residential gate, a sudden mechanical failure releases its full weight, turning a routine motion into an uncontrolled collapse. Never, ever operate or close large gates manually unless rollers, tracks, stops, and guide systems are intact, maintained, and capable of fully supporting the gate under load. On a roadside delivery stop, a truck's rear doors stand open, then a passing heavy vehicle rushes by, and the air itself turns into a moving force. Never, ever leave vehicle rear doors unsecured in live traffic lanes. Latch, restrain, or control them before working behind the truck. A fast-moving truck pushes and pulls large volumes of air, creating pressure waves and turbulent wake zones. When that airflow hits an unsecured door, it can generate sudden lateral force, causing the door to swing or slam unexpectedly. Wind isn't just weather, it's moving pressure. If traffic is flowing, secure every panel, door, and surface before standing in its swing path. At a service bay beside a parked trailer, a tire is being handled at close range until stored air pressure releases all at once and turns the wheel assembly into a high-energy hazard. Never, ever stand over, lean into, or work beside a tire under pressure unless it is fully deflated or restrained with approved safety equipment. In an active warehouse yard, a worker walks across an open lane, unseen in front of a forklift's raised load as moving mass and limited visibility converge without warning. Never, ever operate or walk near forklifts with loads that obstruct the operator's forward view unless pedestrian zones are separated, travel paths are controlled, and spotters or alternate travel methods are in place. A loaded forklift creates a moving blind zone. When the load blocks visibility, the machine travels without sight of what's ahead. Even at low speed, the combined mass limits braking distance. Once a pedestrian enters the blind zone, safe separation becomes the only reliable control. If the load blocks the view, the risk is already moving. Separate people from machines or control the path because mass without visibility leaves no time to react. Inside a workshop, 3 workers gather around a running industrial machine until one quick reach crosses into the moving zone. Never, ever place your hands near a machine's moving zone unless the system is fully shut down and locked out. Machines don't pause for human timing. Once motion is engaged, rollers, clamps, or press arms keep cycling with constant force. When the mechanism closes, the clearance disappears instantly, and the moving zone becomes a no-contact hazard area. If the machine is powered, the hazard is active. Stop it, isolate it, lock it, out then work. On an elevated electrical structure, a worker reaches toward overhead lines to complete the task, but it didn't go as planned. Never, ever approach or handle overhead electrical lines without verified isolation and minimum approach distance. Energized lines create an electric field that can bridge air gaps. When distance collapses, current arcs instantly, releasing energy faster than reaction time allows. Electricity doesn't require contact to strike. Distance is the only barrier. Once it's gone, the hazard is immediate. At a night construction site, a suspended work platform hangs beside a steel structure. In one moment, the support above it changes. Never, ever rely on suspended access systems without redundant support, secure anchoring, and continuous fall protection. On a residential job site, a compact excavator is positioned on a soil mound to reach forward. The machine isn't square to the ground beneath it, and it soon loses its stability. Never, ever operate equipment on uneven terrain without proper positioning and full track contact. Excavators rely on track alignment and a centered load to remain stable. When positioned sideways on loose soil, gravity shifts the center of mass past the track base. Machines don't correct poor setup. If positioning is wrong, gravity will take control. On a chaotic construction site, a heavy concrete slab shifts during a lift, then suddenly breaks free and drops without warning. Never, ever stand inside the drop zone when heavy material is being lifted, shifted, or torn loose. Concrete slabs can fracture or pivot when lifted, shifting the load path instantly. Once support fails, gravity accelerates the drop so fast that the danger zone expands before anyone can react. If it's hanging, cracked, or being moved by a machine, treat it like it's unstable. Clear the drop zone, control the area, and never rely on damaged material to stay in place. Inside a busy garage workshop, a truck sits under active work until a small shift turns the wheels into motion and the entire setup loses stability. Never, ever work on or around a vehicle unless it is fully immobilized with chocks, brakes, and secure supports. On a busy tile job, a worker tries to drop a large slab into place, but the moment the weight shifts, balance disappears, and it moves faster than expected. Never, ever set heavy tiles with a wide, unstable stance or poor body alignment. Control the load before you lower it. Large tiles shift the center of mass forward, and if the footing isn't planted correctly, the load can rotate suddenly. Once the weight tips past balance, gravity accelerates the movement instantly. Big tiles don't forgive bad posture. Set your feet, brace your core, and lower the slab under control every single time. On a dusty roadside repair spot beside a school bus, a mechanic crouches over a tire like it's just another normal fix, until stored pressure suddenly turns the work zone into a danger zone. Never, ever treat a pressurized tire like it's harmless. Always assume it can release stored energy without warning. At an industrial construction yard, a crane lifts a massive cylindrical structure over a trailer while the load begins drifting offline. Then the boom structure gives way and the suspended weight drops out of control. Do not operate elevated work platforms beneath or inside. The swing path of a suspended crane load. Inside a workshop, a vehicle is suspended while workers guide parts into position, but above them, one loose rod is hanging with stored motion waiting to release. Never, ever work beneath suspended components unless every loose part is secured and the swing path is controlled. Inside a dusty demolition site, a worker drives his drill into a damaged brick wall until the overhead section suddenly shifts and releases without warning. Never, ever drill or cut into a weakened wall without securing the overhead section. Always assume loose material can fall the moment vibration starts. On a quiet roadside, two utility workers step up to an electrical box beside a building. Then, in a split second, the entire corner erupts in a blinding flash as sparks burst outward into the street. Never, ever work on an energized electrical panel without full isolation, lockout verification, and proper arc flash protection, because one wrong contact can trigger an instant arc release. Electrical faults release energy as an arc, turning current into extreme heat and pressure in milliseconds. Once the arc forms, it sustains itself through ionized air, expanding outward in a rapid flash release. Electricity doesn't give warnings. It gives consequences. If the circuit is still live, one touch can turn a routine repair into a flash event. Inside an industrial yard, a heavy load hangs in the air while a worker casually sits on a plank beneath it until the rigging suddenly gives way and the drop turns the platform into a catapult. Never, ever position yourself under a suspended load. No plank, support, or safe spot can protect you if the lift fails. On a residential balcony, a man climbs onto a metal fence to reach overhead wiring. Then, in an instant, the line flashes and the air erupts in a sudden burst of sparks. Never, ever touch or cut overhead power lines without full isolation. Electricity can arc through air and strike without direct contact. High voltage can jump gaps by ionizing air, creating an electrical arc that releases heat and energy instantly. Metal railings and tools also act as conductors, turning the entire area into a live hazard path. Power lines don't forgive mistakes. They don't care about distance, metal, and timing. If it's overhead wiring, treat it as energized until proven otherwise. A ladder is set in a narrow driveway, tools moving above and below until one small slip turns gravity into a sudden drop zone hazard. Never, ever work beneath a ladder or elevated position where unsecured tools or equipment can fall. In a busy tire shop, two mechanics work around a mounted wheel until a loose part suddenly drops like a trapdoor. Never, ever work beside a mounted wheel or rotating tire machine unless every cover, ring, and attachment is fully locked in place. When a wheel assembly is under rotation or mechanical tension, any loose cover or ring becomes unstable. Once it slips free, vibration and gravity combine, turning it into a fast vertical drop hazard. Not every tire failure is a blowout. Sometimes it's a simple unsecured part turning into a falling hazard. Lock every component, clear the drop zone, and never stand where a heavy ring can fall straight down. It's early morning inside a quiet restaurant kitchen, and the air is already loaded with invisible fuel. One single spark is all it takes to turn the entire room into instant chaos. Never, ever ignore the smell of gas or assume a closed room is safe. If gas is leaking, the entire space has become an active ignition hazard. High above the ground, a line worker finishes the task and turns to descend. The ladder is there, but the transition is the danger zone. Never, ever transition between elevated structures without continuous secure contact and fall protection in place. At an industrial yard, a worker climbs onto a tanker truck while vapor vents from an open hatch. In seconds, a sudden pressure burst erupts from the tank, blasting upward and throwing nearby objects off balance. Work on pressurized tanks only after the system is fully depressurized and properly vented. Pressurized tanks store large amounts of energy within compressed gases or heated vapors. When a hatch or valve suddenly releases that pressure, the expanding gas creates a powerful upward force capable of throwing nearby objects or workers off balance. Pressure systems must always be stabilized before opening or accessing them. Stored energy can release instantly and with extreme force. On a quiet roadside near a bridge barrier, a truck pulls away along the narrow street when a large flatbed trailer suddenly breaks free and rolls forward toward the concrete wall. Always confirm the trailer hitch, locking pin, and safety connections are fully secured before moving any vehicle with a trailer. Inside a chemical facility in Dothi Gudam village, a worker begins mixing chemicals inside a large drum. Within moments, a sudden reaction ignites, sparking a fast-moving fire inside the mixing area. Chemical mixing operations must strictly control substance compatibility, handling procedures, and ignition risks. On a sidewalk beside a red flatbed truck, two workers try to manually lift a large metal cabinet onto the truck bed. As they raise it, the tall cabinet suddenly tips sideways off balance. Never manually lift oversized or top-heavy equipment without mechanical lifting support. Inside a quiet work area, a worker stands beside equipment along a concrete walkway. Suddenly, a vehicle crashes straight through the wall and into the work zone. Never, ever assume a work area is protected just because it sits behind a wall or structure. At the construction site, a worker uses his own body weight to guide an object being lifted by a crane, then suddenly loses stable control and is left suspended with the rigging. Do not use your body as a counterforce to control a suspended load. Always guide crane-lifted objects with proper positioning, approved taglines, and safe lifting procedures. Inside a busy factory packing line, workers move a long aluminum ladder through a narrow aisle between moving boxes. Then the ladder suddenly pivots upright and drops across the work area. Do not move long ladders through crowded work areas without controlling their balance and ensuring the path is completely clear. On a roadway, workers climb onto the top of a tanker truck to access the hatch. Suddenly, a massive cloud of vapor bursts out of the tank and spreads across the area, then ignites in a flash of flame. Never open or work on pressurized or volatile tanks without controlled venting and proper safety procedures. In a quiet yard, a man climbs a ladder to cut a thick tree branch overhead. Then the limb breaks free and drops onto the ladder, driving it suddenly off balance. Do not cut branches directly above a ladder without securing the ladder and controlling the direction of the falling limb. At an industrial loading platform, workers watch as a large load hangs suspended above the work area. When the lifting support suddenly gives way and the load drops from the rigging, workers should stay completely clear of the area beneath suspended loads during lifting operations. Beside a parked dump truck at an outdoor work site, a worker steps onto what looks like solid ground. In the next instant, the surface gives way, revealing an unsecured cover over a liquid-filled pit beneath the surface. Always verify that covers, grates, and work surfaces above pits or tanks are properly secured and capable of supporting weight before stepping onto them. On a highway bridge, several road workers stand behind a maintenance truck directing traffic with flags. Suddenly, an approaching truck fails to slow down and slams into the parked work vehicle. Work zones on active roads require strong traffic control measures and clear separation between workers and moving vehicles. At a busy loading yard, a worker stands on the back of a truck, repositioning heavy stone slabs. When one massive panel suddenly shifts, sliding across the truck bed and throwing the load dangerously off balance. Handle large stone panels and heavy sheet materials using proper lifting support and controlled positioning rather than manual force alone. Inside an auto repair shop, a car is lifted high on a hydraulic hoist while maintenance is performed underneath. Suddenly, a heavy mechanical component loosens and drops from beneath the vehicle. Work under lifted vehicles requires securing all components and maintaining a protected workspace beneath the lift. Beside a roadside power line project, a crane truck lifts a heavy utility pole from the ground. As the boom raises the load, the weight suddenly shifts, tipping the truck onto its side. Crane trucks must be properly stabilized and positioned before lifting heavy loads to prevent overturning. When a crane lifts a heavy object, the load creates a turning force around the truck's base. If the load moves beyond the machine's stability limits, gravity pulls the center of mass outside the support points, causing the vehicle to tip. Lifting operations depend on stability and proper load balance. Once the center of gravity moves past the support base, the machine will overturn. Inside a workshop, a worker places one end of a long plank on the floor and tries to break it by stepping on it. The moment his foot lands, the opposite end of the plank suddenly whips upward like a lever. Use proper cutting or breaking tools when handling long boards instead of applying force that can cause sudden rebound. When force is applied to one end of a flexible board resting on a pivot point, the board behaves like a lever. If the stored energy releases suddenly, the opposite end can whip upward at high speed. Improvised methods can create unexpected motion. Use the correct tools to control how materials break. Inside a busy control room corridor, a worker walks past electrical cabinets and bumps into a ladder left in the walkway. Then the tall frame tips and drops across the passage. Keep ladders properly secured or stored when not in use, especially in active walkways and work corridors. At a demolition site, an excavator tears into the lower level of a multi-story concrete building. Suddenly, the structure loses support, and the structure begins folding sideways through the frame. Demolition work must follow a controlled sequence that maintains structural stability while removing load-bearing elements. Buildings rely on load paths that transfer weight through columns and walls to the foundation. When key structural supports are removed unevenly, the load redistributes suddenly and gravity pulls the structure into collapse. Structures fail when their load paths disappear. Controlled demolition sequencing prevents sudden structural collapse. At a roadside loading area, a pickup truck is stacked high with tightly packed mattresses while the tall load shifts during adjustment. Then the entire stack tips sideways off the truck. Overstacked cargo must be evenly balanced and properly restrained before anyone climbs or works on top of the load. When cargo is stacked high above the vehicle frame, the center of gravity rises dramatically. A small shift in weight or tension can create a tipping moment that pulls the entire stack sideways. Tall loads amplify instability. Secure, stabilize, and control the load before working around it. In a wooded clearing, a worker stands on a ladder, cutting a long tree branch. The moment the cut completes, the heavy branch swings back toward the trunk like a pendulum. When cutting branches under tension, workers should position themselves outside the potential swing path. Inside a tight, brick-walled garage, a man leans forward to crank the handle of a small tractor. The engine suddenly kicks back, sending the crank handle snapping violently in the opposite direction. When starting machinery with a manual crank, operators should keep stable footing and maintain enough clearance from surrounding surfaces. Manual crank starters can suddenly rotate or kick back when the engine engages. That sudden torque transfers force to the operator's arms and body, pushing them off balance. Manual start systems can jerk violently when the engine fires. Always keep space around you when cranking machinery. At a construction site, a worker pushes a long metal rod into a stuck running concrete mixer. Suddenly, the spinning drum grabs the rod and whips it upward with the rotation. Workers should keep tools and body parts away from rotating machinery while it is operating. At the edge of a deep construction pit, a crawler crane lifts a machine from the excavation floor. When the rigging suddenly fails, shifting the load and pulling the crane sharply toward the edge, lifting operations must use properly rated rigging and controlled load positioning to prevent sudden force shifts during hoisting. On a gravel driveway, a compact tractor begins driving onto a flatbed trailer behind a pickup truck. When the truck suddenly rolls forward while the tractor is halfway up the ramp, shifting both machines toward the edge of the drive. Vehicles and trailers must be fully secured and immobilized before loading heavy equipment. Inside a shopping mall corridor, a worker stands on a tall stepladder while reaching overhead. Suddenly, he loses balance, and gravity pulls him downward. Work at height requires stable ladder placement and controlled body positioning to prevent sudden loss of balance. When the center of mass moves outside the ladder's support base, gravity quickly accelerates the downward motion, and the ladder can no longer remain stable. Height multiplies the consequences of small balance errors. Stable ladders and controlled movement keep gravity from taking over. Inside a warehouse filled with towering stacks of aluminum cans, a forklift inserts its forks into one of the tall pallet columns. When the stack shifts and the unstable load begins collapsing through the row of pallets, forklift operations around tall pallet stacks require controlled lifting and stable stacking to prevent structural collapse of stored loads. Outside a hospital driveway, an ambulance begins reversing along the curved road. While the rear blind zone remains hidden behind the vehicle, drivers must visually confirm the path behind their vehicle before and during reversing. Under a backyard patio roof, workers adjust support posts beneath heavy overhead beams. Then the load redistributes unexpectedly, and the structure moves out of alignment. Never, ever remove or alter structural supports without temporary bracing and load redistribution in place. At a vehicle wash ramp, a pickup truck approaches slowly while a worker stands ahead guiding the driver. Suddenly, the truck accelerates forward and surges down the ramp toward the spotter. Drivers should maintain controlled speed and clear communication when approaching workers who are guiding vehicles. When a vehicle accelerates on a downward ramp, gravity and engine force combine to increase forward momentum quickly. With little distance to react, the vehicle's kinetic energy carries it directly through the worker's guiding zone. Vehicle guidance zones must stay clear of sudden acceleration. Slow, controlled movement is essential when workers are spotting. Inside a routine maintenance shop, a vehicle is being slowly guided into position until one small gear shift changes the vehicle's path and turns the entire bay into a danger zone. Never, ever guide a moving vehicle from the front or side inside a workshop. Use a designated spotter zone and physical stopping. Barriers. In a narrow construction lane, a worker stands between two vehicles, seconds before one of them starts to move. Mid-afternoon on a city street, under repair. Barriers line a fresh pavement cut while a dump truck idles near the curb and a van sits just ahead. Between them, a worker moves casually, as the driver, high in the cab, cannot see the area directly below the hood or near the front bumper, and no spotter is present. The truck eases forward. From the cab, everything seems clear, but the worker remains just out of sight, hidden by the orange barrel. The wheel nudges ahead before the operator halts, realizing too late how limited the view was. Never, ever stand or work in front of or behind a truck without clear eye contact and acknowledgement from the driver. Heavy vehicles move slowly, but blindly. Always maintain visual or radio communication before approaching or crossing near trucks. Inside an industrial facility, a battery pack hits the metal grate. Sparks scatter from the casing before it finally drops into the water below. Never, ever strike, puncture, or impact a lithium battery pack. Mechanical damage can trigger internal short circuits and immediate thermal escalation. When a lithium-ion cell is crushed or impacted, internal separators can fail, allowing positive and negative layers to contact. This internal short circuit releases stored chemical energy rapidly, generating intense heat and causing vented gases to react. Mechanical impact can instantly destabilize lithium battery cells. Handle damaged packs with controlled isolation procedures, not force. At a small construction site, two workers drop a 50-kilogram cement bag from the roof toward the ground below, where someone reaches out to stop the falling load. Heavy construction materials must be lowered using controlled methods such as hoists, ropes, or mechanical handling instead of manual catching. A falling load gains momentum as gravity accelerates it downward. When someone tries to intercept it, the momentum of the moving mass can exceed what manual handling can safely control. Gravity multiplies the force of falling materials. Controlled lowering methods protect workers from sudden impact forces. High above a busy job site, workers stand elevated on a crane structure when the boom suddenly shifts and drops under load without fully collapsing. Never, ever exceed a crane's rated load capacity or ignore structural warning signs. Do verify load calculations, ground stability, and structural integrity before lifting or elevating personnel. Cranes rely on balanced load distribution and structural compression strength. When load forces exceed design limits or the base loses stability, structural members can deform, causing sudden downward displacement without full overturn. Structural limits are not suggestions. When load balance fails, gravity finishes the job. At a company entrance, a trailer hauling large fabric rolls turns through the gate when the cylindrical load suddenly begins to roll and shift across the trailer. Heavy cylindrical cargo must be properly restrained and stabilized during transport to prevent rolling or falling during vehicle movement. In a narrow warehouse aisle, a forklift advances between towering racks. Then one slight misalignment shifts the steel and stacked pallets out of balance, turning the aisle into a hazard zone. Do not operate a forklift in tight, high bay aisles without maintaining strict alignment, controlled speed, and verified clearance from rack uprights. On a busy factory floor, a high-speed rotating assembly spins openly along a production line. Then a split-second contact converts steady rotation into an uncontrolled pulling force. Never, ever approach or work near an exposed rotating shaft, chuck, or spindle unless it is fully guarded and locked out from motion. At a dim roadside turn, a pedestrian crosses in front of a semi-truck, stepping into a blind spot that limits the driver's view. Never, ever walk directly in front of a stopped or turning semi-truck. Keep a wide safety distance and make eye contact with the driver before crossing. On a roadside work area, a worker inflates a tire as pressure climbs beyond its rated limit. Then the casing fails suddenly, releasing compressed air in an uncontrolled burst. Never, ever inflate a tire while leaning over it. Use a clip-on air chuck, stand clear, and inflate from a safe distance. On a narrow roadside, a worker climbs a tall, rolling scaffold to cut a heavy tree limb. Then the branch shifts, and gravity pulls the platform off balance. Never, ever cut or drop heavy limbs while standing on unsecured scaffolding. Use proper rigging, controlled lowering, and a stable work platform designed for tree work. On a wet auto shop floor between two lifted vehicles, a small blower feeds air into a white plastic bucket, and seconds later, internal pressure overwhelms the container, and the contained water forces outward. Never, ever insert a blower or compressed air source into a sealed container that is not rated for internal pressure. If air cannot escape, pressure will build until something fails. A blower continuously forces air molecules into a confined space, increasing internal pressure with every second of flow. When the internal pressure exceeds the structural strength of the container walls or lid, stored energy releases rapidly outward as the material fails. In a dusty yard beside a parked truck, a worker places a tool onto a large white gas cylinder valve, and within seconds, a high-pressure gas plume expands outward. Never, ever use improvised tools or excessive force to open a pressurized cylinder valve. Controlled release must always be gradual and regulated. On a busy construction site, a suspended steel beam swings into position between tall columns, and in seconds, the entire frame begins to move in ways no one expected. Never, ever release or disconnect lifting support from structural steel before the frame is fully secured and braced. Unrestrained members can shift and lose stability under their own weight. Steel beams under gravity create bending moments and lateral forces when not fully braced. Without permanent connections or temporary supports, load redistribution causes rapid instability and progressive structural movement. Never release lifting support until the steel is fully secured and braced. Unrestrained frames can shift under their own weight in seconds. Inside an auto repair shop, a technician leans in close to a tire on the changer to inspect the bead, and in an instant, the wheel assembly releases upward as pressure escapes. Never, ever place your face or upper body over a tire during inflation. Maintain distance and use remote air controls with proper restraints. Inflating a tire stores compressed air energy inside the sealed cavity. If the bead slips or the casing fails, the rapid pressure release converts stored air energy into a powerful upward force. Keep your face and body clear during tire inflation. Use restraints and remote inflation to control stored pressure. Inside a busy auto shop, a visibly swollen tire rolls on the floor, and the moment it's punctured, compressed air releases suddenly, driving the wheel outward as an uncontrolled force. Never, ever puncture, cut, or tamper with the swollen or overpressurized tire. Depressurize it using controlled remote deflation procedures only. On a residential framing project, two workers stand on a narrow beam while cutting an extended timber. One unstable shift pulls the center of gravity past the edge. Never, ever cut or work from an unsupported beam without stable footing and fall protection. Elevated balance points can fail without warning. In a tight construction passageway, a mini excavator swings its bucket sideways slightly while a worker stands directly in front, and the steel arm moves into space in an instant. Never, ever stand within the operating radius of an active excavator. Maintain clear exclusion zones around moving equipment at all times. Inside a workshop with open floor access pits, a worker lowers a heavy metal sheet into position, and in a split second, the panel shifts and support is lost. Never, ever position yourself over an open pit while placing a cover panel. Secure the panel from outside the opening before shifting your weight. When placing a loose metal sheet over an opening, the panel has no fixed support until fully seated. If body weight is applied before it is aligned and stabilized, gravity pulls the system off balance as a single unstable unit. Place pit covers from stable ground, not from over the opening. Unsecured panels cannot support body weight, even for a moment. In a confined indoor space, a worker cuts overhead metal, and a shower of bright sparks scatter downward close to his position. Never, ever cut or grind overhead without full face protection and controlled positioning. Falling sparks and debris follow gravity directly toward you. Angle grinders eject high-temperature metal particles at high velocity during cutting. When working overhead, gravity and momentum direct those sparks and fragments downward along the operator's line of sight and body position. Overhead cutting sends heat and debris straight down. Protect your face and control your cutting angle before you start. In a tight store aisle lined with bottles, a worker stands on a small stepladder, then suddenly slips, shifting his balance on the shelf as it begins to tip. Never, ever climb or reach from a ladder placed against unsecured retail shelving. Maintain stable footing and avoid lateral force on display racks. When a ladder shifts or a foot slips, the body's center of gravity moves abruptly outward. That sudden lateral load transfers force into nearby shelving, and if the anchoring cannot resist the torque, the entire rack begins to tip. Use stable ladders and keep your weight centered at all times. Unsecured shelving can tip when sudden force is applied. In an industrial yard, a worker moves along the curved metal structure of a tanker when a sudden flash of ignition appears without warning. Never, ever conduct operations around a tanker carrying flammable material without proper grounding, vapor control, and ignition source management. Fuel vapors can ignite instantly when conditions align. Inside a processing plant, technicians in full protective suits stand beside a tall metallic vessel. Then a dense white vapor suddenly erupts directly from the container itself. Never, ever approach a pressurized metallic vessel without confirmed isolation and internal pressure verification. Assumptions around containment can fail instantly. Inside a vehicle repair bay, a large transmission housing hangs suspended beneath a raised vehicle. When the supported unit suddenly shifts mid-position, never, ever position yourself beneath a suspended drivetrain component. Do secure the load with a rated transmission jack and stabilize it fully before adjusting or removing mounting hardware. In a yard under CCTV, a dump truck raises its red bed high into the air. Then the hydraulic arm suddenly gives way and the entire body drops without warning. Never, ever stand beneath or beside a raised dump body without mechanical locking supports engaged. Hydraulics alone are not fail-safe supports. Hydraulic cylinders hold load through pressurized fluid, but seal failure or line rupture causes instant pressure loss. Once pressure drops, gravity converts the elevated mass into rapid downward force with no gradual transition. Hydraulics lift loads. They do not guarantee support. Always use secondary mechanical locks before working near raised beds. At the edge of a muddy excavation pit, a worker stands below while an excavator bucket swings overhead. Then a full load of soil pours down directly into the trench. Never, ever stand inside a trench beneath an active excavator bucket. Establish clear exclusion zones before any load is moved overhead. High on a utility pole beside mounted transformers, a worker shifts from the pole to return to the ladder, and in that split second, stability vanishes. Never, ever transfer from a pole back onto an unsecured ladder without fall protection and a secured base. Mid-air transitions remove stability instantly. During a transfer between supports, the body's center of gravity shifts laterally while contact points are reduced. If that center moves outside the ladder's narrow base of support, gravity immediately creates rotational force and downward acceleration. Transitions at height are the most unstable moments. Secure the ladder and tie off before shifting your weight. Never rely on balance alone when moving from the structure back to the ladder. Inside a small industrial workshop, a worker reaches into an active machine housing, and in an instant, the moving components engage the space inside. Never, ever place your hands inside energized machinery without full lockout and isolation. Moving parts can engage without warning. Rotating or reciprocating machine components create continuous mechanical motion driven by motors and stored kinetic energy. When the operating zone is entered, friction and rotational force can engage and move faster than human reaction time. Lock out and isolate machines before reaching inside. Moving mechanisms do not stop for human reflexes. In a dry farm field, a worker reaches toward a running agricultural machine to clear a blockage, when the moving mechanism suddenly engages and draws material inward at once. Never, ever attempt to clear a blockage from active farm machinery without full shutdown and isolation. Rotating components do not pause for quick fixes. Agricultural machines use rotating shafts and feed mechanisms that generate continuous torque. When debris or tools enter the intake zone, friction and mechanical force can pull objects inward instantly, multiplying applied force in fractions of a second. Shut down and isolate before clearing any blockage. Machines move faster than reaction time. Inside a factory floor, two workers stand near a large rotating roller machine. When one sleeve gets too close to the moving drum and the rotating surfaces engage instantly. Never, ever reach near exposed rotating rollers without guards and full lockout. Entanglement hazards react faster than human reflexes. Rotating rollers create continuous nip points where surfaces draw material inward. When clothing or other material enters that pinch zone, friction and rotational torque pull it toward the contact point instantly. Keep clear of rotating nip points at all times. Guard and lock out machinery before approaching moving rollers. On an active job site, a worker moves below an elevated work area when an unexpected material suddenly drops from above without warning. Never, ever stand or work beneath active overhead operations without wearing proper head protection. Falling objects can strike before there's time to react. When materials fall from height, gravity rapidly converts potential energy into downward force. Even small objects gain significant impact energy over short vertical distances. Overhead hazards are silent and fast. Head protection reduces impact risk when the unexpected falls. On a busy street construction site, a fully loaded concrete mixer truck rolls toward a freshly formed trench. Then the ground beneath it suddenly collapses. Never, ever position heavy vehicles over unsupported excavations. Verify soil stability and structural support before load transfer. Concrete mixer trucks carry concentrated axle loads that create extreme ground pressure. If the underlying soil or trench support is uncompacted or undercut, the weight exceeds bearing capacity, triggering sudden shear failure and collapse. Heavy loads require verified ground support before positioning. Soil failure happens without warning under concentrated weight. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insight could save a life. Take care.